Good people on the quest for good content. Hi, how you doing? What's good? Welcome back to another installment of You Can't Rap Better Than, where we break down some of our favorite verses from some of our favorite artists and more or less give an argument on why we think it is perfect rapping or songwriting in that given instance, space, or time. Whether it's individual technical ability, broader message, we usually try to pick one or two aspects of the verse and hop right in. But before we hop right into one of our favorite verses by one of our favorite artists ever, got to talk to my counterpart, check in, see how he's doing. Dave, hey, how we doing?
Hey Bill, doing great, thanks. Yeah, you nailed it. One of the best songs, best verses from one of, I would say, the best artists. And I think a lot of people would agree, one of the best artists of our time. Certainly one of our favorite
Mm-hmm.
artists, Bill. I think when I think back just to our friendship as a larger thing, which we've been friends for a long time
Mm-hmm.
now because we're getting older, my friend. Um, Lupe, spoiler alert, the artist that we're talking about, and this song and his abilities as a writer and a rapper were one of the first things that you and I think really bonded over, and helped us recognize that we were brothers. We just hadn't spent enough time together to realize it. So very excited to talk about Lupe and the song we'll be discussing, and the verse from the song we'll be discussing, Hurt Me Soul. One of his best and one of the best rap songs of the last, I don't know, 30 years,
What
20
since it
years? Let's
since it
talk
came
about it.
out,
Yeah, let's talk
specifically
about
we'll
it.
be focusing a little bit more on the third verse because that is a verse that accomplishes a lot of things in a short amount of time, which is always impressive when you are writing, specifically songwriting. I think I've said this to people I like or people I just talk to music about. Life is songwriting, say the dopest shit in the shortest amount of space, and you've got a place somewhere, whether it's your dream job, whether it's storytelling, whether it's performing music. If you can communicate your shit more effectively than anybody else, you've got a shot to be very, very successful in whatever it is your endeavor is. And the third verse, particularly in this song, does that to a T. Actually, I find myself, Dave, in a weird way, thinking that the first verse of the song is actually my favorite in the song from a narrative perspective. I think it's just connecting with me more over the last 2 years. But from a technical delivery standpoint, from a subject matter standpoint, from a summation and a closing out and a rounding out of a narrative song, or the narrative within the song, excuse me, I don't know if there's any better rapping that we can easily think of than what Lupe accomplishes on the third verse of Hurt Me Soul. But we can go in lyric by lyric, line by line, however we want to do it. But David, give me some of your first initial thoughts about maybe the first time you heard this verse, what you thought of, how you reflect on this verse now that the album is over 20 years old, or right around 20 years old, excuse me, and just talk me through it, and then we'll hop into the third verse.
Yeah, well, I think first, I wanna just say, and this is something that, when you and I looked at another one of the best verses of all time, which is featured on You Can't Rap Better Than, Mos Def's verse from Thieves in the Night. I didn't say it then, but I think it applies to this verse and to Lupe's rapping here too, which is kinda what you just said. I think really great rapping and lyric. Whenever I talk about this stuff, I said this when I talked about Doom too, big air quotes around lyrical anytime I say lyrical, because I think there's like a lyrical miracle connotation sometimes with that it's a bad thing. I mean it as a good thing, but good lyrical hip hop to me is like comedy, right? And comedy is what you just said, which is the funniest stuff is actually where get to the funny, there's no filler, and you're able to do something really complex and interesting with the least amount of time, words, movement. Boom. The example that always comes to mind for me is Bob Odenkirk, who's a legend in the comedy space and as a dramatic actor because of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. But he really made his bones as a comedy guy. And he used to say that the funniest person he ever met was Chris Farley, because Chris Farley could make him laugh for like 30 minutes straight without saying anything. Just be sitting next to him and looking at him. He could just have him laughing, just being him. And he was like, to me, that's the purest form of being a funny person, is like you don't have to say anything. You can just be and you're funny. And I think that Lupe and Doom and Mos Def and these really, really truly top of the mountain guys are like that with rapping, right? Where it's like they're able to be so complex, and we're about to get into it. We're going to talk about the actual lyrics that we're waxing poetic about. They're able to get really complex, but keeping it simple or contained in a way that's so digestible and understandable. And that's really the genius in it. So, like a great comedian, Lupe is able to paint his picture in this third verse. And I'm really glad that you brought up the beginning part of the song because we're going to focus on the third verse. But I just want to call out that in addition to the narrative stuff that you're talking about, where I think really the biggest thing that really tees up the third verse and one of the biggest themes of the song is contradiction. This idea that hip hop in and of itself is a contradiction, right? And it starts by Lupe talking about how he's drawn to hip hop in the first place, right? Listening to Too Short, listening to cursing and talking in a derogatory terms about women, which are not things that he agrees with, but he can't help himself but being drawn back to it. The themes of hip hop in the second verse of gangster shit, right? You know, ghetto stuff, glamorizing the ghetto lifestyle, and then at the same time, you know, being victim to it, but also still, undeniably being drawn into the cool factor of that. Those themes and the way that he rhymes about them specifically I think really do such a perfect job of teeing up the third verse because not only is it those themes that I'm talking about setting it up, but I think actually like in the rhyme scheme itself, I'm gonna let you get into the third verse here in a second, but I want to tee it up by doubling down on this point by saying the third verse, spoiler alert, it all rhymes, right? Everything, every bar rhymes with the last one in the third verse, and that's part of the genius of it. But to get there, he has these turns of phrase in the first and second verse that are just so like alliterative and unique and interesting, and they kind of juxtapose the almost like straightforwardness of the third verse, I would say. And like the couple of examples I would say like really, have like always stuck out to me in my mind and have like forever burned in there in a good way. Are things like for children with leaking ceilings, catching drippings with pots, coupled with compositions from Pac. Like though that little turn of phrase, it's like, holy shit. That was almost like a doom level density of rhymes and syllables like packed in right there. The other one that always sticks in my mind, like he never prayed to God, he prayed to God, shouting out this Jay-Z lyric. I'm thinking, golly, God guard me from the ungodly. It's like, whoa, he's really doing something interesting here. And then the third verse hits you like a ton of bricks because it ties all these themes together in this completely different rhyme scheme. So with that, Bill, a lot of talking, but with that, we get to this third verse that we want to focus on where we've called out the contradictions in hip hop. We called out all the kind of insidious things that are kind of woven into our culture. And now Lupe is going to bring it home as only he can.
Yeah, well said. Well described, too. As I jump into the third verse, I usually tee it up like this. You can't rap better than Lupe Fiasco raps on the third verse of Hurt Me Soul because you can't as easily connect the personal human struggle to the broader macro factors causing said struggle with the diversity, ease, and lyrical dexterity that he did and that he does. So every time you listen to that verse, David did a great job describing. He goes from micro and personal to macro is how I describe it. First verse is the personal introduction. Second verse is the environmental observation and the societal ripple effect that often we observe with hip hop, the coolness, the grind, the grit, but juxtaposed with the lavish nature as David just described. But then you get the all-encompassing factors. We can go bar by bar, but I'm just going to give the general description and the summary of some of the aspects and the motifs that I hear and observe as we go through this verse, right? First line of the third verse, he mentions the Grim Reaper, this anticipated death, if you will. Second line is talk about Macintosh marketing. And from a macro level, we're talking about the extraction of resources for decades that the U.S. has basically firmly implanted themselves in resource-rich countries and extracted all for the sake of pushing and product and commodification, right? No matter how we market and package this thing, it's made up of a bunch of very valuable components that we don't have available in the U.S. And we go into other countries like, cobalt is very much extracted for iPhones, things of the like. We talk about oil fields, right? This is basically the millennial timeline wrapped up in a nutshell, because we've been fighting for oil basically since we were born. And it's one of the most discussed things in the political and news landscape from a millennial lifetime perspective, from the invasion of Iraq to what's going on basically in the Latin American countries right now. Like, it's basically the one millennial constant. We talk about Brazilian adolescent disarmament, child labor and the abuse of children for said labor and the punishment associated with that. Talk about Israeli occupation and Islamic martyrdom. We talk about laser guided targeted military grade weapons to enact the U.S. agenda across the entirety of the planet. We talked about oil for food bartering, terrorist organization harboring, sand camouflage army men, again, going back to the global superpower that is the greatest army to have ever existed to this point, the U.S. Army, CCF sponsoring, world conquering, telephone monitoring, right? This constant surveillance that this country puts under its citizens, and just the broader world as we are navigating spaces to extract resources, command and maintain power within the country borders and then beyond. String theory pondering, bulimic vomiting, going back to the internal relationship one might have with themselves, the abuse and or self-destruction to adhere to unreasonable societal standards. That's what that particular bar makes me think of. Catholic priest fondling, preemptive bombing, right? The religious persecution that has basically been going on for the entirety of human history. And then he does this cool little thing with the O sign. He talks about Osama and Obama, blending those two names together. We know that Lupe has been critical of Obama pretty vocally in his third album, Lasers, if I remember correctly. But that criticism of political figures in the U.S. is very nicely wrapped up and juxtaposed, because it almost gives the feeling that one is just equal to the other, depending on how you phrase it or look at it, right? Breaking in my car again, petty crime, deforestation and overlogging, Hennessy and hypnotic swallowing, right? The overindulgence and the poisoning of our bodies as we basically slow ourselves down to cope with some of the stresses and fears. Hypnotic coffin sickness, hydroponic coffins, sickness, and then the wrap up at the end, right? I'm doing a very general, quick summary of all of these factors and all of these stressors and all of these micro and macro micro and macro stimuli that impact the human experience that Lupe basically describes describes himself to be able to see from his upbringing through the consideration of hip hop, his personal introduction, the environmental effect he had, not only observing it, but living it, and then being intelligent enough to see how all of these things are basically interwoven at the macro level. It is so smooth. It is so easy. It is so well thought out. It is so precise, not unlike the laser guided target that he mentions in this third verse. And it is so jam-packed with depth that you actually do pick up some new factor that Lupe has observed in the course of this verse throughout his rapping. Now, I'm going to stop there because, David, we can call out specific lines, but I did want to talk about the specific things that he named before maybe we get into the rhyme scheme and things like that. So I've been rambling for a little bit, so why don't you take the mic from me?
You got it, Bill. Well said. I'm glad you went bar by bar just to really hear it and break it down. And I think what I would start with is like on the rhyme scheme, just because that's kind of what I was talking about in the first two verses. Like in listening to the song a few times, to prepare for this and reading through the verse several times, it really is almost like prayer like or chant like kind of. It has that rhythm to it, but it's also blending those what I was talking about in those first two verses, that alliterative quality of like everything fits, right? And it kind of goes back to your initial point of like there is zero filler in this verse at all. Every word is incredibly important and ties to the next thing and related to the thing he just said. And like you said, it's really not about hip hop, it's not about him, it's about everything. It's about the world. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. That's also, I think, the part of the reason why it has such a deep connection in my mind to Moses' verse on Thieves in the Night. It has the same quality of it being able to really sum it all up, like really like capture what's going on in the world. That, as he says at the end of the verse, all the world's ills, he's able to actually describe them in this insanely artistic and creative way that's just like mind blowing on the first time you hear it and the 100th time you hear it because you like Lupe's part of what makes Lupe's music so great has that re-listenability because there's so much depth to it. So the rhyme scheme and how he is building to it in those first 2 verses and then just delivers this flawless execution of it third is a big part of why it's so impressive to me and why you can't rap better than it. Um, like I mentioned with Thieves in the Night, this feels like an updated version of that song for me for the time that Lupe has grown up in and his experience with it, which is there's tons of parallels to Moses' verse because America is still America and there's lots of stuff that's been there forever. But it is kind of with these like slightly different and more current themes, which for better, not better, for worse, unfortunately, what he's talking about are still very much like you alluded to, at play today, which is part of what makes the music timeless and powerful as well. And then, the two last things I would say before I can kick it back to you for some lines that you want to look at is like the line I want to call out is the end line because when another you can't rap better than that I did, which was a solo was That's That by MF Doom, which is just an amazing song, an amazing verse. But it has what I said in that episode is one of, if not my favorite bars in hip hop history, which is give an MC a rectal hysterectomy, lecture on removal of the bowels foul technically, which is just ridiculous. But another one of my favorite bars in hip hop history, uh, which is very different, is the end of this verse, which is all the world's ills sitting on chrome 24-inch wheels.
Like that.
And to me, like that. Sorry, you're right. That is the end of it. Like that, and then we get into the end of the song. But that is as good of a one-line summation of kind of the commercialization and maybe the problem, if you want to really simplify it, the problem with contemporary society and capitalism and all the stuff that we're contending with. I mean, Lupe just fucking nails it, right? He just absolutely hits the nail on the head. Maybe my favorite or the best end to a verse ever for my money. Like it's just, that's a personal thing, but like it's just such the perfect summation to the perfectly written verse. Um in line with all of his values outside of being a musician, like you alluded to. Like he's not lying, he's totally being truthful. It's just so powerful. So what an unbelievable line. You can get into some of the other, the lyrical dexterity that he's showcasing. But the other thing I would end with is we talked about the first 2 verses, so might as well talk about the whole song. Part of what makes this such a great verse is that the hook and the chorus to this song, it's great. It's actually a great hook, and I think that Lupe has had an amazing career. One of the things that I think maybe hasn't been a strong suit of his is, like, hook making and like, hit making from that, traditional standpoint. To me, this song actually is an incredible hook. It's incredibly catchy, and it's such a rare example of, like, a catchy sung hook done by the artist and isn't corny or doesn't to me, it doesn't feel corny or pushed. It actually just fits totally perfectly with the themes of the song. So the verse not only is a perfect verse, you can't rap better than it, but it actually leads right into a really phenomenal hook and is part of just like a perfect song. So, um, yeah, again, kind of just random thoughts, but part of why here's what I'll actually end with. Part of why this song and he as an artist means so much to me. I'm gonna go way back. You asked me with your first question, the first time I listened to this, what it
Mhm.
meant to me. This song means as much and more to me now as it did the first time I listened to it. And the first time I listened to it, it was one of the reasons why I got interested in hip hop in the first place because I had never heard somebody put it all together that way. I'd never heard somebody really sum it up, like capture all the stuff that I was experiencing as like a 12-year-old that didn't know how to put into words. I didn't know how to verbalize. I didn't know even know how to wrap my head around. And this guy was able to do it, like you said, so precisely and almost effortlessly. I had to come back for more. I was hooked. And so for me, it's so representative of me falling in love with the art form. And now all these years later, as an adult with so much more lived experience, it's even better, right? Because he's just been proven so timeless and right. So, well, what an incredible verse! What an incredible artist, Lupe. Thank you, brother.
Mhm.
Seriously.
I won't touch on the hook too much. I'll say the thing that strikes me about the hook is it's complex. It changes basically verse over verse, which is pretty cool and unique. I love a good complex hook. That's just maybe just one of those wrinkles and textures that is a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but who knows? But going back to the third verse, the last thing I'll say about that last line, and then I'll dovetail into a couple lines that I like in particular, is that sitting on chrome 24-inch rims like that is a perfect encapsulation and summation of the narrative of the story, which is I am fully aware of the grit and grime that we often get exposed to through the experiences of our life. All these outside factors basically affecting our day to day in ways that we can't even see. And it's propped up literally by the rims, but these rims are often glamorous features on a car, right? They get you from point A to point B. And in a way, it feels very representative and metaphorical that Lupe could not get to where he was as a rapper then and where he is now without the acknowledgement of his personal introduction to hip hop, the gripes that he had and that he expressed in verses 1 and 2, and then taking that macro view and saying, this actually goes beyond me in some ways. This actually extends to the greater planet and it impacts every individual human experience in ways that we can't immediately see, from the small, they're breaking in my car again, to the high, oil for food bargaining, Islamic occupation, Islamic martyrdom, et cetera, right? So this very seamless, easy zooming in with the microscope or the telescope and zooming out is perfectly encapsulated in that last line. It's amazing. And I'm sure it wasn't effortless writing, but I'm sure if it wasn't, he sure made it look like it was or sound like it was, because that's a lot of complexity mashed into a short amount of space. Some other lines that I love from the third verse: string theory pondering, bulimic vomiting, Catholic priest fondling, preemptive bombing, and Osama and Obama in them. Again, the no bomb in them with Osama sounds like Obama. I don't think I made that point clear earlier. I think I mentioned it outright, but he never actually says Obama, right? It sounds like he does, which made me make that connection. So apologies if I confused anybody listening there. Hennessy and hypnotic swallowing, hydroponic coughing, and all the world's ills getting into that last line, right? This very internal sickness that literally that is supposed to cure all the world's ills, but actually ends up poisoning us a little bit more. Sitting on chrome 24-inch wheels. So like that. So it's pretty cool to hear. You've gushed about Lupe. I'll try to sum it up in 10 seconds here. Lupe is one of the two MCs that inspired me to start writing, and I'm not near that cachet or expertise in my mind of a writer that he is. But I think that's the beautiful thing about art is you get inspired and you do it. And even if you never make a nickel off it, or who's to say I don't, never know. Even if you never make a nickel off it, even if you're not world famous, even if you're not critically acclaimed, art is an incredibly important part of the human experience. So find a way to practice, mingle, and interplay your lived experience with your personal art so you can understand yourself and the greater world around you. And he's one of the two MCs that inspired me to begin that exploration. So, Lupe, if you see this, thank you for your personal contribution. Hopefully we get a chance to chop it up over this and some of your other music someday. Maybe we even get to make some music one day. That'd be kind of cool. But in the meantime, thank you for this song. Thank you for the broader catalog. Thank you for everything you've done. You're one of the few rare lyricists in my personal opinion. So if you ever see this, just, thank you. This is pretty cool from a kid from just north of Chicago, really going into the depth of rap, with him being one of the two main conduits that introduced me. So that's why I think you can't rap better than Lupe Fiasco on the third verse of Hurt Me Soul. David, why don't you take us out?
Well said. Well said. Lupe, we appreciate you big time, man. You have and will continue to make lots of important contributions to our culture, which is a big important role. Yeah, I'll take us out. I forgot to say one thing during my little spiel, so I'm going to tag it with what I'm going to say it now. I think it actually dovetails nicely off what you just said, Bill, which was beautiful. Um, I mentioned that like this third verse feels like a prayer or like a chant. It kind of has that incantation to it. And the song is called Hurt Me Soul, and what he's talking about, and I think why you and I and lots of other people are moved by it, is like it's talking about society, it's talking about ills, but these things that he's talking about and music and how we relate, all those things that you just mentioned about how we relate to the world, how we're introspective about things. This stuff isn't just bad because it's annoying, right? Or because it hurts, random people. It is bad because of that, but it's not just that. It's great, and you can't rap better than it because it has that next layer of depth to it. which is like it's actually this like cosmic spiritual thing that we're talking about. And the stuff that we're battling and the stuff that we're combating, the stakes are as high as they could possibly be, right? Because it's nothing short of our soul on the line, right? And rarely, I think, are artists able to convey that level of stakes in the precise, effortless format that he does. And it's on this song. It's exemplified especially well on this song, but I think that's true across his music and across his career and across how he's been. So I will just close out by saying it was just such it's always a pleasure to go back to Lupe's music, especially Bill when you and I get to talk about it because it brings me back to us being younger people relating to it in a different way, right? Because we hadn't had the experiences that we've had now, and we had different perspectives on it then. So it's always a pleasure getting to chop it up with you. Like Bill said, Lupe, you ever see this, we do really appreciate your contributions. And I would have to agree, Bill, that you can't rap better than Lupe Fiasco's third verse, Hurt Me Soul. Take it easy, everybody. Be safe. Thank you.